back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And I am your host, Jackson Keller, sitting alone in a dark garage.
Oh, like the movie that we're going to be talking about.
I did a bit. I'm a comedic genius. I'm the only fucking genius in the business.
Yes, it is time. We are taking a break from quarantine classics to do a little bit of Uwe Boll. This was suggested to us way back when by a friend of the podcast, Desi, Tom. And we're like, this is a brilliantly stupid idea. We should talk about it because neither one of us have seen any Uwe Boll movies. So we dove into it, and we figured the best place to start is with Alone in the Dark, his most critically panned movie, releasing in about 2005-ish era. It's a lot.
It's a lot, and yet it's also nothing.
Yeah, it's garbage.
No, I mean, this is definitely not, let's get this out of the way. Like, you knew this was a bad movie if you clicked on a review of analysis, a podcast about Uwe Boll's Alone in the Dark. You know it's bad. What you're wondering is it worth watching as, like, a meme? And the answer to that is probably not.
It is the right level of competent in that it is not bad enough to be a meme. It is not good enough to be enjoyable. It is sitting perfectly in that, like, D-C tier range of it is fine. It's not good, but it is fine.
I don't know if I would even call it fine, because it's pretty incompetent in a lot of ways, but not in ways that are especially funny, is the problem.
That's fair. Yeah. That's honestly fair.
Like, it's... There are a couple of good meme moments, which of course we will talk about, but like I'm already forgetting most of them, and I finished this movie like an hour ago. So, Uwe Boll, I've talked to other people who are more familiar with his work, but these do not tend to be movies that are known for being like The Room, Birdemic, Troll 2, like any of the high guardians of schlock.
Despite what, if you were online in the early 2000s, the people of the internet would tell you as they were railing against this as like the most horrible thing ever produced. It must be seen to be believed on how bad it was and trodden on my childhood. And I will never forgive you, Uwe Boll. You are Satan incarnate.
And it's just a garbage. I mean, it's like the first Resident Evil movie, but even worse, because that has Milla Jovovich kicking a dog in the face.
Yeah, it is, like, as I said, it is incompetent. Fine is a little bit of a strong word, undeniably, but, like, it is by and large just boring. It is the perfect level of competent where it is just boring. There is nothing about it that elevates it in any way, shape, or form, and in fact will be forgotten really quickly. The biggest thing for me, like as we were looking into this movie, is its 1% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and I've done so much research about this fucking movie.
my man Sean's about to teach like a college lecture on Uwe Boll.
It's wild. But the big thing to take away from that is that 1% is complete bullshit. Like, this would probably sit in like the 66-70% range of today's standards. 1% is wildly wrong. So don't expect that. Like, that 1% is where I would put like Love on a Leash, a genuinely bad movie where there is no soundtrack to it whatsoever. The audio mixing is awful. The dialogue is incomprehensible. Like, that is an absurd, bad, terrible movie, but somehow rated better than this.
This is like just barely above like direct to video. Like, it's not quite. It's got too much production to be direct to video quality, but it's hanging around there.
So before we really dive into it, we should talk a little bit about what Alone in the Dark is and who Uwe Boll is, because there's a non-zero chance that you clicked on this just because you're a listener to the podcast and might not know what's going on and why we're talking about a semi-obscure movie from 2005.
Yeah, I mean, because Uwe Boll, he's kind of the peak of his infamy has kind of died down. Like, I feel like back in like, you know, the late 2000s, the early 2010s, like that was when he was at his peak, like challenging critics to boxing matches, and you know that famous "I'm the only fucking genius in the business" quote. So there's a good chance that you might be wondering, like, especially if you're a little younger, like, who even is this and why do I care? Because he runs a restaurant now.
Yeah, and I mean, it's possible that you're even in our age group or older and are completely unfamiliar with him, because if you were not paying attention to video game movies or movies in general when this happened, you might not have any idea who this man is. Like, I watched this with Sam, the girlfriend, and I was talking about Uwe Boll and like his whole legacy a little bit, and she's like, I have no idea who you're talking about.
Yeah.
So like, he has entirely faded from the cultural mind, very much a flash in the pan of the early mid to late 2000s.
Yeah, and so I think that there's, like, you know, so Sean's the man who brought all the research this time, so I'm mostly going to give the floor to him, but I want to start with an observation on why that is. So when we think about, you know, or at least one of the reasons why that is, right? So when we think about video game movies and like bad video game movies, usually they're bad movies, but what puts them over the edge is that like they're about a thing that people care about, or at least has some sort of pedigree, right? So like Mario, Doom, Resident Evil, Sonic the Hedgehog, these are not game series known for their strong narratives, but these are game series that are like highly regarded and respected for other reasons. And while Sonic and Resident Evil may have like had their ups and downs, they have enough like iconic games that people are actively invested. And this tends to not be true for Uwe Boll's work. A lot of these, if you look at them, I was trying to see if there was a pattern, and really the only pattern is like whatever was recent at the time. And Sean has more insight on why that is. But these are not like not even, these make the Resident Evil movies look like highly faithful, like to the letter adaptations of the games. Alone in the Dark has almost, from what little I know of the series, has almost nothing to do with the game. And furthermore, of all of the games, and this might also be a reason that this one in particular is so reviled, Alone in the Dark has the highest pedigree. Far Cry is kind of the only other notable one, because that's a popular franchise now, and you know, I was a fourth grader when the game came out, the first one, so I didn't exactly have my finger on the pulse, but that would have been like critically well received because it was an interesting new game with a lot of like visual quality and maybe some new mechanics, right? Like, I actually don't know how people feel about the original Far Cry, but it definitely wasn't like the major franchise that it is now, that Ubisoft's kind of doing the Assassin's Creed thing to it. But all of the games, all the other games, aside from Far Cry and Alone in the Dark, like Dungeon Siege, I only know what Dungeon Siege is because of In the Name of the King. Like, I feel like Uwe Boll's shitty movie is more well-remembered than Dungeon Siege. I don't know a damn thing about it.
I have no idea what it is, period.
Yeah.
So,
Blood Rain, you know, some semi-popular franchise, but mostly because, like, violence and tits. It was kind of like a poor man's God of War with, like, a sexy lady.
I mostly know it from Uwe Boll, honestly. When you say Blood Rain, I think of the poster for Blood Rain. I barely knew it was a game.
I remember there were people, like, I knew some kids in school who were into Blood Rain, but again, it was very much in that, like, it was like in a trashy way of like, ooh, like, here's this game about like a boob lady that's killing people. Like, I shouldn't be playing this. And then, you know, Postal is pretty infamous game, pretty trashy, but like was, you know, kind of a big deal at the time for, you know, not all the greatest reasons. So really it was just like none of his games. Again, like, Alone in the Dark has, like, the highest pedigree as, like, kind of the forefather of the survival horror genre. And, like, every other game, like, House of the Dead's a pretty popular arcade game, but it's already just kind of, you know, stupid, trashy, like, light gun game. Not not like the thing that I feel like people get super worked up about. So yeah, these are not movies. This is not like the Super Mario Brothers movie where like people are offended because they love the source material. Or, like Alone in the Dark is the only one that I can see like being the case. That's like a big deal.
Well, in hindsight, I will say it is entirely possible that as these were happening, there was a lot more of a pushback to them. Like, I know that Far Cry was lambasted for the reasons that you're discussing, that like Alone in the Dark is hated because it did take the story and twist it and make it some weird, bizarro fucking version of itself. So, like, looking back on it, that might be true. But in the time, the consensus might have been a little bit different.
No, you're absolutely right, because like I think that people were upset about the fact that they didn't follow the game, but I don't think people give a shit anymore, is the point.
No, I mean, pretty much everything he has done, all of the games are not really talked about anymore. A lot of them are like Atari games, and that explains a lot of it right there, because, I mean, Atari is doing Atari stuff. I haven't really heard from them in a while. I know they're still out there kind of as like a ghost of themselves. But yeah, a lot of the games that he made movies off of were just convenient at the time and not as culturally relevant as something like a Mario Brothers.
Flash in the pan kind of games, not like institutions.
Exactly. But I mean, that's also not necessarily a bad thing. A Flash in the Pan game might become an institution later down the road. So like, to say that he chose these knowing that they were Flash in the Pan games might be a little disingenuous as well.
Sure.
But that's some broad stroke stuff. Alone in the Dark, the movie that we watch, features Edward Carnby. I always want to call him Cornby. It's Carnby. It's set in around 2008-ish. There's some ancient Native American, or just ancient culture, I don't even know it's Native American because it's all over the place, that believed in some evil, dark time thing. Listen, the descriptions are very bad. This movie is very bad at explaining anything, and it opens with like a 2-minute exposition dump. The broad strokes of it are Edward Carnby fights demon dogs and zombie orphans and hopefully wins. Ooh, I wonder what happens.
It's like kind of Resident Evil, kind of Indiana Jones, kind of like it reminds me of like a D tier, like National Treasure.
Yeah, there's a lot of National Treasure vibes to it.
Yeah.
So that's, in general, what Alone in the Dark is. It's got Christian Slater and Tara Reid in it, who are the two most notable people in the movie.
Christian Slater has the worst Matrix trench coat in the world in this movie.
That man's outfit is wild, because it's the trench coat, a black wife beater, and like slacks. And at one point they go up against a whole bunch of people. They're with the military, and I'm like, does anyone want to give this man a flak jacket or something? He is literally wearing a cotton tank top.
Edward Carnby is like, he's presented as such a badass, like, you know, cool dude, but like his name is Edward Carnby, which does not fit that image of like big badass Matrix man.
Well, we'll talk about why in a second here too. Jackson has done a decent job already of kind of explaining Uwe Boll of filmmaking, and I did steal that joke from Jackson, who made it in the pre-discussion, but fuck you, Jackson, I made it on record.
I'll let you have it. You're pulling the heavyweight on this episode. I can't complain.
But I mean, that's basically what Uwe Boll did. He made a bunch of video game movies. Those are what he's most known for, but he also made a bunch of serious movies at about the same time, sometime at literally the same time. The man was a workhorse of a director. His actual like serious movies I don't know as much about. Like a cursory IMDb glance, looks like they're not super well rated or anything, but they're definitely rated better than most of his video game movies. To kind of explain how he did things and hopefully shed some light on the quality that you can expect, while making Blood Rain: The Third Reich, the third Blood Rain movie, he actually filmed 3 movies using the same sets. He filmed Blood Rain the Third Reich, which was the main film he was shooting at the time. He filmed Blubberella, which is Blood Rain the Third Reich shot for shot, except they like dub over some jokes and stuff. And also they replaced the main actress with a heavy set woman. And that's the entire joke.
Yikes.
But we're not out of yikes territory yet, because the same sets that he used for Blood Rain, the Third Reich, a movie about killing vampire Nazis, a parody movie about killing vampire Nazis, he used for a serious movie called Auschwitz. I'm gonna let that sit for a second. That, feels in bad taste in a lot of ways, to say the least. But it is very emblematic of how he treats his films. Uwe Boll is kind of a gentleman who likes to work on multiple projects at once, and does not put a whole lot of focus, it seems, into a lot of his projects, at least on the video game side of things. To kind of back up everything that I'm saying here right now, I watched a movie called Fuck You, the Uwe Boll Story. It's available on Amazon. It's all right. It's a documentary about Uwe Boll and just kind of his life as a filmmaker and how he ended up where he is today. But like, they were talking about how he would very much just like not really care what was happening on set as long as people hit their lines and hit the moments as close as they could. He'd be like, all right, cool, we're moving on to the next set. I kind of internalize this as most movies, the way they function, you have your director and you have your producer. Your director is always pulling for bigger, broader sets. Your producer is always pulling in the opposite direction. Wants smaller, tighter sets, cheaper expenses, all that good stuff. And that creates a kind of neutral ground where we see most movies fall. You know, they're still grounded, but they're still extravagant. That's, you know, you can feel the pull of the producers and the directors. Uwe Boll was kind of his own producer in a lot of ways, both literally and figuratively, and very much pulled to try and save costs, save on time, save on as much as he could. And so the resulting films, at least in the video game way, feel that way quite a bit. Alone in the Dark is like the epitome of this. There are times I was watching the movie where someone would say something and be like, all right, hang on. Do you wanna run that back, take that again? And the movie would just move right past it. And the answer is no. Uwe did not want to run that back, take that again. It was good enough. We're moving on to the next scene. And that extended into like the way the script writing was happening, the things that were going on behind the scenes. He was very much just like, let's move. And you can feel it.
Uwe Boll's kind of exceptional in this case. He's kind of weird because he's like you normally when you hear like director and producer, you think of like, you know, absolute like tyrannical madman who like sacrificing everything for their finger quotes vision. But Uwe Boll's very much like a workman, like, you know, just sit there, get the shoot and move on. He's a more dedicated producer than he is a director, which is quite strange and unusual, I feel like. One
of my favorite stories I heard while watching this movie, this documentary, was apparently at one point they were shooting a scene, I think in the Third Reich again, and this movie was a lot about the Third Reich, and he was reading a boxing magazine. The scene wrapped, he yelled, cut, he looked over at his DP or whoever, his script producer or something, said, did they get it right? They go, yeah, and he goes, great, and he never once looked up from the boxing magazine. So that, yeah, I mean, everything I have heard about this man, it really explains a lot of how at least his video game movies end up being. And I do keep saying his video game movies because we have not watched any of his serious movies, though that might change.
More on that later, folks.
This is an episode of us saying we're going to talk about that later because there are so many pieces that need to be compartmentalized that will be backed up with later facts that we promise we're going to get to everything. Back to Alone in the Dark, though. Let's talk about the game series Alone in the Dark and where the adaptation might have run wild and why people might not like this one. So, in continuing my research, I actually bought and played a good chunk of the first Alone in the Dark, the first Alone in the Dark, the one on DOS. And first and foremost, it's an interesting game. I actually kind of want to fuck with it some more. I played about an hour of it. A good chunk might be exaggeration, but I played about an hour of it. The vibe of it, I kind of dug. It is very much hard in the way that an old DOS game is hard, so I didn't play super much of it, but like I got a better vibe of what those games were about. I did some reading of like the game summaries on Wikipedia. I got a better feel for them in general, just to kind of try and get in the mind of someone who would hate this movie and give it as bad of a review as it did.
Get in the mind of someone who really stands for Edward Carnby.
Exactly. So what you might have noticed when Jackson and I were talking is we were talking about Edward Carnby in a very modern sense, very 2008 sense. He has a cell phone. He talks to Tara Reid. 2008 things. I don't know what happened in 2008. I was an 8th grader and stupid. Alone in the Dark, the video game, is set in 1920, and Edward Carnby is an old-timey detective looking into Lovecraftian horrors in a mansion.
Carnby is an excellent name for an old-timey detective. It is a terrible name for, like, a badass action hero.
It's like Morpheus sitting there holding out 2 pills. Listen, you take the red pill. You wake up in bed tomorrow, you believe whatever you want. You take the blue pill. Edward Carnby. You take the blue pill. I show you just how deep this rabbit hole goes.
So what's gonna be, huh? Are you gonna be a detective? Or are you gonna be a gunman?
So that is the basis of Alone in the Dark, and why some people I can completely understand took umbrage with this interpretation of it, because this interpretation of it is wild when contrasted with that. It has almost nothing to do with the source material.
Were you gonna mention the greatest thing about the man, the myth, the legend, Edward Carnby?
I mean, spoilers for Alone in the Dark, the game series. If you care about that. Alone in the Dark 4, this is my favorite line on any Wikipedia page, just ever. It's so good. Alone in the Dark 4, aka Alone in the Dark, the New Nightmare, explains how Edward Carnby is still around in 2001, because originally he was in the 1920s, now Edward Carnby's in 2001. Well, as it turns out, he's not. Let me get this right here.
my man goes straight to the source. He's getting it perfectly right.
When Alone in the Dark, the New Nightmare was made, the setting was moved from the 1920s to 2001, and a background legend was made up in order to explain that Edward Carnby belonged to a lineage of shadowhunters who were born on the 29th of February of every 40 years and raised as orphan children in St. George's Orphanage, all of them going by the name Edward Carnby. That is an insane sentence to read. My favorite part is the fact that someone wrote, and a background legend was made up in order to explain. That is the most passive-aggressive Wikipedia entry I have ever read. It is beautiful.
Edward Carnby, hero of time, his proud Joestar lineage. Oh, it's so ridiculous. I love it. This is not to be confused with the Alone in the Dark game I'm the most familiar with, which is the 2008 one that is like Sonic 06 level bad, where that is the original Edward Carnby, but he just like mysteriously wakes up in like modern day New York for some reason that I don't know.
Canonically over 100 years old. I believe.
Yes.
Like that is genuinely part of the game. He's canonically over 100 years
and he still just looks like a generic video game action hero dipshit. I want to see him with like his handlebar mustache. I've seen the original Edward Carnby. God damn it.
Well, there's your Alone in the Dark video game detour segment to kind of explain both some context for this movie and also just because I love that fucking entry in Wikipedia.
It's just because that Wikipedia sentence is a god tier meme.
So, now that you have all of the facts, all of the backstory, all of the lore about Mr. Uwe Boll, about the history of Alone in the Dark, why does this movie have a 1% on Rotten Tomatoes?
Before you give your more researched answer, may I give my like thoughts while I was watching the movie?
Yes, absolutely. I'm curious to know what you thought of it, because I struggled so hard. As a man who watches a lot of movies, a lot of them very, very bad, I was like, this is mediocre. It's not bad. It's bad. It's bad. Don't.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean though. It's the worst kind of bad, truly. I mean, maybe it's not. We've had that ongoing debate. You know, we aren't going to solve that issue here. But you know, it's a very bad kind of bad, mediocre, bland. But so what I was thinking is that first, because of the nature of Rotten Tomatoes, like you see this sometimes, and that like you'll see a movie with like a bad score that is not like maybe as bad or like as disastrous as it seems. Like the tomato meter, like it must always be remembered when you're looking at it. The tomato meter is simply an aggregate of yay or nay.
And a bad one at that, I might add. Just to throw that in there, it has lost all nuance. Someone who might like a movie but have too much critical elements to it might read as a nay as opposed to a yay. Just putting that out there.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of it helps that on Rotten Tomatoes critics do put in whether they're yay or nay on it themselves, I believe. But yeah, you are still taking a complex opinion and boiling it down to yay or nay, which I think it's boiled down even further to a percentage. So with like a really, really bad movie, you might have someone
what happens when you boil tomatoes?
They get all squishy. Oh no. I don't like that.
This is probably getting edited out. I thought that might be a funny comment. It was not.
So, you know, you put them in a stew and you get the tomatoes, whatever. But,
never mind. This might stay.
But so the thing about that is just when you have like everyone say that a movie is nay, like a 1% doesn't mean that like, you know, it's not like Metacritic, where like Metacritic averages the scores, and like, you know, like a 20% on Metacritic is like everyone gave that game a 2. Whereas like all that 1% means is that 1% of critics had a favorable opinion of this movie. So if most of them were just bored by it, that's going to reflect in the score. Whereas like something that's truly hideous might have a broader range of scores, maybe more like a 15, because there are people for whom maybe like they're big contrarians like Armand White or something, or they just like found it funny and had a good time with it. I think even the 1%, from what I know, even the positive rating on Alone in the Dark is like, yeah, this is basically a meme and I had fun. So like that was kind of my first assumption, just sort of the nature of Rotten Tomatoes. My second assumption was that because this would have come out in a time before like hipster millennial so bad it's good culture that I'm very much a part of, I would like to add, kind of came into full swing. That,
I mean,
like,
it's why we're watching this movie. Let's be honest.
No, exactly. Like we're definitely part of this. So if I'm being glib and mocking my fellow hipster millennials, they are my fellow hipster millennials, and I include myself in this category. So I think the thing is that like the people reviewing this movie would have overwhelmingly been like Gen X, right? And I feel like just like from what I know about like Gen X and boomer critics, they have a far lower tolerance for this kind of nonsense. Like if the movie isn't traditionally good, like they don't want to hear about it. Like there were like the Room and stuff like that did sort of start, like Gen X has their own cult movies, but I feel like overwhelmingly that they were kind of the groundwork for hipster so bad it's good culture, and now it's a lot more widespread. I mean, the Room got a major motion picture made about it, for God's sake. Although I guess so did Ed Wood, so maybe I'm talking out of my ass, but
it's a generational thing, arguably. Like, so bad it's good has always been a thing, I would say. It's just like different generations appreciate different versions of that.
I also think that when it comes to like serious criticism, maybe this is more accurate than, you know, just saying that hipster millennial culture is bigger, although I think it probably is a little bigger with like the proliferation of the internet. I think that how we consider that there is a lot more debate on like how we would rank a movie like that. Like I think that there's a difference in the approach to criticism, and that like I am inclined, like if you asked me like on the tomato meter to put like The Room as a fresh or a rotten, I would put The Room as fresh because I enjoy that movie. And in the end, that's all that matters to me is sort of the end result. Whereas I think that and I think that's sort of like not that I have the most common perspective on that, but it's certainly more common than before, where it was like, okay, like I'm enjoying this movie, but it's fucking trash. So let's rank it as rotten. And I think that was much more the dominant idea, where now them pesky postmodern neo-Marxists, millennials.
We'll get you one day. We'll get you one day.
So that was my prevailing theory. Just sort of changing attitudes towards like so bad it's good movies, and just the general mechanics of Rotten Tomatoes. But Sean did more research. I'm sure that those are both part of it, but it's not the whole story.
Yeah, no, those are 100% part of why this movie is rated so poorly. The other part of it is how video games were appreciated in the mid-2000s. I found a couple reviews that specifically called out that this is a video game movie and that is why it's bad. One of them that sticks out in my mind was like, oh, it's based on a video game, and those all have paper-thin plots and nothing happening, so of course it's gonna be bad. What is there to talk about? And like, those are clearly people who are not as up to date with video games, because even in the early 2000s, you know, at that point we had Metal Gears and other such games like Final Fantasy VII. There are games at that point that had genuine story with genuine heart, with genuine moments to it, that just were still being looked down upon. Like the idea of video games as an art was still not a thing.
This would have been the era of like people trying to convince Roger Ebert to play video games, right? Like even though at this point it's become clear to people who appreciate them.
Yeah, and like that is just something that some of the reviewers definitely clearly went into the movie with the headset of, oh, this is a video game movie. Of course it's going to fucking suck. It's based on a video game. That cannot help.
I think that's an interesting intersection of like the critics are coming at it from one perspective of like video game movies suck because they're based on video games and video games are bad, whereas like it's such a Uwe Boll truly under fire from all sides, because then the video game fans, you know, they look at it perspective like, of course all video game movies suck because video games are such a I hate this argument, by the way. Video games are such like a super special, magnificent medium with their interactivity that a movie simply couldn't hope to capture what makes games wonderful, which is bullshit. Games do have like unique things about them, and like, you know, all different mediums have their different strengths and weaknesses.
That's like saying you can't take a book to a movie.
Yeah, it's the dumbest fucking argument, and it's like the most like self-important gamer bro take I've ever heard, and I hate it so much. But so it's funny how like both sides are like looking down on it for like completely the opposite reason.
It's fascinating. This is honestly, I think, just the perfect storm of a movie to get a 1%. I don't know that any other movie. There might be other movies in that same vein, but like this feels like just such an absolute shit show at the right time to net itself that 1%. Like genuinely, I could see this movie sitting comfortably at 30 to 40, no problem today.
Yeah, for sure.
Do we have any other broad stroke stuff, or do we want to talk spoilers?
I think that's it. Unless you had more about the Uwe Boll's personal touch, but that's all from me.
I mean, we can always slide that right in with some of the other stuff if it comes up, but I think I'm good with my broad strokes talking about the man, the myth, the game, the movie.
Edward Carnby's proud lineage.
Edward Carnby's proud lineage. Ah, what a man.
Edward Carnby. It's such a bad name for that kind of thing. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's like a 1920s like detective, like an extremely British man.
Yeah, entirely.
Oh God! All right, Get to the midpoint stuff.
So spoilers, but before we do, we have some stuff to talk about. Most notably, and this is going to feed into everything else I usually talk about in this time frame, what we're going to be watching next week, because we don't know yet. We want to continue Uwe Boll with one more movie. We feel like Alone in the Dark might not have given us the full Uwe experience. But what we're going to watch is up to you guys. So we're going to be posting a poll in our Discord, which you can get access to through our Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast, our Twitter account, that's twitter.com/BADH_cast, and I think that's probably going to be it. There's nowhere else to really post it. But do you guys want us to talk about Postal, which is peak Uwe Boll video game bullshit, or Attack on Darfur, which is peak Uwe Boll serious movie in that it got like awards, like Peace Corps people liked it. Apparently it's like an alright movie. We'll see how that goes, especially how it holds up 10 years down the road.
I am interested either way. I'm interested in seeing if Uwe Boll has the capacity to be an artiste. But I think there's something to be said for, like, finding the shining emblem of a person's career and talking about that, which Postal undeniably is, I think. I mean, because Postal's where all the memes come from. Postal's where, like, you know, I'm the biggest fucking genius in the business, like, you know, trying to box his critics and stuff.
Oh yeah, he did act like that's a genuine story, by the way. We've breezed past the fact that Jackson has said he tried to box his critics like 3 times now. He actively flew critics out and beat them up in a boxing ring. Genuinely.
Although I think he chickened out on one of them, actually. Is that true? Because one of them was like had like a foot on him and like was actually an athlete.
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I do know that Uwe Boll was like genuinely a amateur boxer though. So
yeah.
I'd be surprised if he backed down, but I know he definitely took on 1 or 2 for sure.
Oh, it's amazing. But yeah, so I mean there's something to be said for Postal. I mean I'm sure there's a lot to be said for Postal. But you know, we leave it up to you. Do you want to get the other side of the coin, like Uwe Boll at his best or Uwe Boll at his most?
And here's a hot take if you do choose Attack on Darfur that you might not see coming, in that I wouldn't be surprised if Uwe Boll has the capacity to be a good director. Because we mentioned that he's a restaurateur now. And the thing about that is, his restaurant's really successful. And part of that is the fact that he is putting his all into it. And everything I've said about him not putting his all into his movie projects is interesting in that context now, isn't it? So
it leaves kind of an open question of like, all right, like, you know, we're going to churn out these, like, you know, kind of one for you, one for me. Like, we're going to churn out all these shit video game movies, but, you know, then we're going to make the real shit. There's something appealing about that idea.
So yeah, I'm curious with Attack on Darfur if it kind of recontextualizes some of this stuff, because I'm very fascinated by the man now, even though his culture moment is done and gone, at least for the time being.
I mean, it's nice in a way because you can kind of look at the entirety of like his film career, and you know we can maybe make some statements on it. Like this was, in a way, Uwe Boll is very emblematic of the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We should probly talk about the spoiler. It's been a 45-minute pre-spoiler discussion. We should talk.
What can we truly say? That's all the interesting stuff.
It really is. I mean, listen, spoilers. It's all memes from here, because all that we have left to talk about are goofy fucking moments in Alone in the Dark, because Alone in the Dark is bereft of any sort of theme or external idea, and that is something that Uwe Boll himself has said proudly, honestly. He's like, these video game movies are not supposed to be thematic. I do not make them to say things. I use my other movies to say things. So all that we have are memes.
And I mean, there's some pretty good ones. There's some pretty good ones. The standout meme. Uwe Boll actually directed a Nightwish music video. Because there's a song by them features in this movie. So like there's a scene with an embarrassing like death metal shootout that's hilarious and comes out of nowhere. And it's really peak like 2000.
It is so good. It is far and away the best scene in the entire movie. It is absurd. The action is not very good, but this whole fucking music video happening is just wonderful through it.
It's the action scenes are kind of sickening in this movie. Like how like everything just feels sort of off with like that early 2000s CGI. There's a lot of rapid cuts. It's very dark and like there are flashes of brightly lit stuff. Like I was kind of nauseated watching a lot of it.
Part of that is because they don't really make sense with the context of anything else happening around it. Here's the point where I'm just like, what the fuck is happening? Why is any of this going on? The first action scene when we have one of the superhuman dudes chasing after our hero, and all of a sudden they end up in like some ice fishery, which fine, you know what? It's clearly Indiana Jones-esque. They're running through like this outdoor market, and they end up in the ice fishery. Cool, no worries. For no explicable reason, there's just a rod sticking out of a barrel of fish that some guy gets thrown on at the end of a fish train. There's no reason for it to be there. And, like, that is entirely nitpicky, but it is also entirely indicative of kind of how the rest of the action in this goes, because it's one of those movies where things just happen. And you just have to buckle up and accept that that's what's going on in that scene and not worry too much about it.
The thing about this movie is that it's brain dead simple, and that like it explains basically the entire plot in the fucking Star Wars opening crawl.
I was so worried I was gonna have to read all that, by the way, because it is a lot, and it just gets thrown at you. And like, I'm not above reading stuff. I like the Blade Runner entrance. I really, really like. The Star Wars entrance is iconic, but like, there's something about sitting me down and asking me to read for 2 minutes in front of Alone in the Dark that I'm just like, no, thank you. Especially because, as it turns out, most of it is largely inconsequential to anything else happening in the movie.
Yeah, well, because the thing about Star Wars and Blade Runner, not only are those like stylish, memorable intros, right? But the thing about them is that like there is some reason that you would want to give some background on like what's going on in these like new or changed worlds that wouldn't be immediately obvious just like watching the movie. Like you could figure it out without those opening title crawls, but they help you get situated. Whereas like this is just like, this is the most trite adventure plotline in the world. There's an ancient civilization who did some fucked up things with monsters and also experiments. I was never sure why we needed both the ancient civilization and like the Resident Evil mad scientist. It felt like the movie couldn't decide whether it wanted to be Resident Evil or Indiana Jones.
And honestly, the introduction stuff I think adds more questions and confusion than if it just wasn't there at all. Because it sets up this whole like light and dark thing going on that never makes any real appearance within the movie. Like they make a comment about how the monsters can't live in sunlight, but then at the end they're just walking around in sunlight and one of them attacks them, and like that's the closing stinger. But also, like that's a thing that's a theme, that's an idea, that's a motif that you would chase throughout the movie that they just never do, other than the monsters are weak to sunlight.
And that doesn't ever really, like, come into play in any memorable way. Like, yeah, they have sun bullets or whatever, but this isn't like, you know, so like if we're comparing...
Bullets, I'm sorry. I was gonna let that slide, and then it just like, the fact that you just said the word sun bullets, just fuck off.
I mean, that's what they are.
I know. I'm not telling you to fuck off. I'm telling Alone in the Dark to fuck off.
So, alright, but I mean, sun bullets... That's a good example because, like, you would think that, so, part of the fun of, like, enemies with a weakness like that is, like, exploiting the weakness. So I'm thinking, like, the beginning of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2, where they're fighting that first Pillar Man, and, like, the whole tension of that fight is we got to try and get the Pillar Man outside. We're going to try and trick him into doing that. And nothing like that ever happens. It's just shoot him with the sun bullets.
And, like, there's even some good ideas for action within that, too. Like, you get one in the sun and it, like, dissolves or something. Just, that's simple. That's, like, basic fucking Nightwalker shit. That's not... And there's nothing with it. There's just, like, this weird tension between night and day that's never addressed. And it's wild.
The excuse is so they can have... When there's one scene when they blow up they call them Xenos, by the way. They're literally fucking aliens.
Yeah, I didn't get that at all.
So when one of the xenomorphs blows up, it literally looks like what happens to a monster in Zelda Wind Waker when it turns into like black smoke. And you have Edward Carnby in his shitty like Matrix trench coat, like gunning down, this Zelda monster with his sun bullets. It's like, I'm making it sound funnier than it is, but it's like there are brief flashes of amusement here, but it wouldn't really be worth. Like if you were like drunk off your ass, I could see maybe having a good time with this, but in no other situation.
I don't even know that, like, I would recommend this to someone who is drunk, because I feel like it's boring enough that you would have fun and then fall asleep 3 minutes in.
True. And you would miss my second favorite part, which is when one of the orphan zombies... Alright, so here's another plot line. That's stupid and confusing. A big deal. It's set up to be like...
So confusing.
It's set up to be like a big deal and a mystery that they're using the Bagul parasites from the ancient civilization to implant them in the orphans, and the orphans have a trigger word that turns them into like zombies.
Do they? Oh no! It was when the dude opened the chest that they turned into zombies.
Oh right. So they open Dio's coffin and they all turn into zombies. It's presented like it's going to be this big plot. And, like, I feel like the movie forgets about these people for the most part until, like, the very end when we, like... Because Edward is supposed to be one of the people who was experimented on, but, like, the parasite died within him, so it didn't work. And, like, it's a pretty
he electrocuted himself, which is kind of hinted at because he's found in, like, an electrical station somewhere, but, like, we never actually see him electrocute himself. And, like, that scene, too, it has him, like, the monster's reflected in his eyes, like, something's going to happen with that, but that never comes up again. Again, this is not really super relevant to anything. It's just small, little, weird, just plot dead ends in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, like, it's funny because, like, on paper... all of the elements are there, but they're just presented in such a, like, and I mean there to make, like, an understandable movie, not there to make, like, a compelling movie, but, like, they're just presented in such a slapdash, like, confusing way, and then it devolves into memes, so all 20 of the orphan zombies come back at once, and the military guys basically just gun them down, and my favorite is when... like, this reminds me of, like, an action scene in Troll 2. Like, one of my favorite moments in Troll 2 is when a goblin just yeets himself into a chair and starts, like, freaking out for, like, no reason at all. Very much like that. One of the zombies, like, yeets himself over, like, a 3-story, like, fire escape and, like, Halo ragdolls himself to the ground, and everyone, like, shoots him in the air, so he's just dead when he hits the ground, and it's like, what were you trying to accomplish there, dude? Were you trying to, like, Assassin's Creed, like, assassinate someone from above? You did a very poor job of it.
The rules of the zombies are also... unknowable. Like, they are unknowable. Sam spent the entire time asking, like, wait, are the dogs the zombies? Like, is that the whole thing? Do they transform into one another? I'm like, no, they don't. That doesn't make sense. And they don't. Like, I'm 90% positive that they don't. Like, I can't even be 100% positive that they're not the same thing in some capacity. But, like, we finished that whole fight scene in which they kill the 20 orphans. 19, I'm sorry, because... Cormac McCarthy is also one of the orphans.
The problem with your joke is that Cormac McCarthy is actually way more badass than a name for an action hero like this.
That's fair. The other problem with my joke was that I keep forgetting his name is Edward Cornby, and just come up with other names for him. So it's not a joke, it's me just not having a brain. But like then we get to the main showdown, and Sam's like, "Wait, so I thought there were only 20 orphans as these dogs herd in," and I'm like, "They're not the orphans, right? Right? Right?" Oh, it's so insane. And like I just want to talk about the big thing that stuck with me that really kind of showcases is the whole weird shortcuts that this movie takes and like weird script dead ends and changes and just small little nuances that like once again, if it's by itself, it's really not a huge deal. You know, movies all have some sort of plot hole, and that's fine. You know, it's a suspension of disbelief. It's understanding how movies work. No worries. I'm not the type of person to usually harp on that stuff. But the big thing that sticks out to me, that sticks in my craw, is the big bad FBI agent C13 agent or whatever the fuck that agency in the movie is like, all right, cool, you saved my life, now I'm gonna help you, we need to go to, like, Riker's gold mine or something like that, and so they go there, but earlier they had established that, like, we charted a course using the fucking national treasure-ass gold piece we got, and it's this place that's never identified as like Riker's gold mine or something like that. Like there's a connection there that I have to assume that the place that they need to go is Riker's gold mine or whatever the fuck that place is called. But they never outwardly express it within the movie. So like there's just two separate places that it feels like they need to go that just conveniently overlap. You know, like, and it's not even so much like it's a plot convenience that, oh, look, it just so happens that this is happening where we need to go. They feel like two totally disseparate things that never meet in the middle. They just happen.
Yeah, like, this is what I mean when I say the movie is, like, really incompetent, in that, like, it's a lot of stuff that if you're not thinking about it too hard, you're not gonna like actively be repulsed or like laugh. Like this is why the movie isn't funny. It's not like Tommy Wiseau, who like so obviously breaks all the rules and like is so obviously a complete clown. But like this movie, like at the end when Mr. Military Man like blows up the mine and like we see a shot of him like after the explosion coughing on the ground, I'm like, well, is he dead? Like his body doesn't look wounded. Like is this supposed to indicate that he survived? Because you know that was a big ass explosion. I would assume that he died. But if you're showing me him like looking completely fine and not like charred and burnt up and fucked up, like I'm assuming that he's okay. But then the movie ends.
Yeah, there's no reason for him to be okay. You could just let him die and move on. And then we get the ending, which is an evacuated city that is pristine, but also apparently everyone's supposed to be dead in it, but also evacuated, but also pristine. But there are a couple cars just like slightly askew, you know?
They got like raptured. I guess.
That's a good way of putting it. It feels like they got raptured away. But the idea is that like all these beasts escaped somehow and took over the city or something. I have no idea what the ending was.
And then John was a zombie.
And then John was a zombie.
I mean, that's what the ending feels like. It feels like one of those like meme fan fiction.
No, I mean that's a really good way of putting it. Is that it just ends and feels like it's like I have to end on a stinger of some sort that will not get resolved in any way, shape, or form, and also doesn't jive with the rest of the plot so far. It's daylight! Why are they out? That was the one thing that we know was that they can't go out in sunlight!
No, Edward Carnby, you are the demon.
And that is Alone in the Dark and a quick rundown on Uwe Boll.
My last word on Alone in the Dark is this movie was like an hour and a half long. It felt longer than Seven Samurai.
Oh my god, we haven't even talked about the fact that we watched this with commercials.
Oh my god, yeah, fuck. That is a good thing to mention. Yeah, so you can watch this on Amazon Prime. I wouldn't recommend that you do that because the movie sucks, and also I don't even know if there's an option to rent it.
There's no option to rent it anywhere. I looked. You can't get it on Google. You can't get it on Amazon. You can't get it on any of the other places you usually can. You can get it on Amazon Prime, which is also IMDb TV, which I guess is technically how I watched it, and Tubi, both of which are ad-filled. and confusing as fuck.
I got some pretty wild ads. I got an ad telling me to watch Lost in 2020, and I also got an ad for the Adam Sandler film Mr. Deeds.
My ads consisted of a Nestle commercial, but the problem with that Nestle commercial was that it opens up with like, because the movie at least cuts in like decent places, like it's not mid-sentence, it's at the end of scenes. So like there was a tense quote unquote scene, and then it cuts to this thing of like signs in yards like, we're anxious, we're not sure what's happening either. And Sam and I look at each other like, is this part of the movie? Is this a thing that's happening? And then like it's cut to like a head of somebody talking, and we're like, this feels like it could be part of the movie. This can't be part of the movie, right? This isn't part of the movie. And then finally it's like Nestle, and we're like, it was an ad. But it genuinely was almost indifferential from the rest of the movie. Thankfully though, our other ad was like, scene ends, Domino's Pizza! And it actually scared the shit out of me more than this movie did.
This isn't much of a horror movie.
No, it's not at all. It's like, there's clearly some ideas, especially in the final act, where like people are getting some like good body horror going on. But like, yeah, it's by and large not a horror movie.
It's got an action scene that they just shoot a bunch of guns, and it goes, crawling in my skin. These wounds, they will not heal. And it's like that for about like a solid minute, and it's the greatest.
We did listen to the entire end credits just because the music was so incredible. Like, I genuinely don't know whether the movie was improved or made worse by the addition of that music.
Probably improved if you could remember it at all.
You know what? I'm sold. I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. Find my writing over at 25yearslatersite.com. Honest to God, who knows at this point? I know enough about Uwe Boll. Maybe I'll write something up. It's fucking possible, gang. I am slowly becoming an expert of some sort, and I don't know how I feel about that.
My man Sean's taking the road of the Uwe Boll scholar. You know, he's gonna get his PhD in Boll. I've been Jackson Keller. You can find me on YouTube. I didn't tell you to like, comment, and subscribe earlier because I fell behind on the other videos, but we're gonna sort that out. So you better come be a YouTube friend. That's Jackson Keller. That's me. I'm also on Twitch, twitch.tv/JacksonJKeller. Haven't streamed there either. I've been a sad boy.
If you want to follow the podcast, you can do so on Twitter. That's at BADH_cast. Again, you should go check that out because that's where we're going to be posting one of our polls as to what Uwe Boll movie we're going to be talking about next week. We don't know yet. The other place to do that is at our Discord, where you can also very easily yell at Jackson and I because we hang out on that fairly frequently. So if you want to come talk to us, that's $1 a month over at patreon.com/BADHcast. $5 a month gets you access to all of our backlog of bonus episodes. We got a bunch of really good ones. We had a Nino Cooney episode come out last week. We need another episode coming up here soon. And if you want to suggest that, that's $10 a month. That gets access to everything before, and you can tell us what to watch. It also gets a little something.
Thank you so much, Julia, Travis, Pat, Mom, Aunt Summer. Go, team, go. Patreon, go.
Also, thanks to Lords of Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out wherever you can. Stream them, support them, buy their music, all that good stuff. Do it. It's good. Also, thanks to MyViewsLaterSite.com. There's a little button of us in their corner, and you should go read all the other articles and stuff over there. As I said, I'm a writer for them. I also do their audio editing, but there's also a shit ton of other authors and writers and people who are talented on that website, so you should go read that. Next week, vote on our polls.
Vote. Exercise your rights. It's time to vote.
Uwe Boll to the polls.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go.